Welcome, everyone. This is the first session of the Career Path series. I'm Brittany Boyce with SEI, and I'll be your moderator today. This session is recorded. As you entered, you were muted and your video was turned off. Please keep it that way for the rest of the session. You should also have seen an entry poll as you were coming in. If you could take that, there will also be one at the end of the session. Let's get started, and here is SEI Director Laura Champion.
Thank you, Brittany. Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Champion, the Director of the Structural Engineering Institute at ASCE. Welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining this first session in our new program, Career Path Series, Insights with Glenn Bell and Structural Engineering Industry Leaders. With this new remarkable shift of the world, creating a new normal, SEI and ASCE have been hard at work to offer you more timely and relevant virtual ways to engage with our profession and connect with your colleagues. In addition to learning new skills and sharpening existing skills, we have created several new programs such as the monthly SEI Instagram live chat, today's series with the current SEI President Glenn Bell, as well as a brand new ASCE virtual technical conference scheduled the week of September 14th. We've created a new page on the SEI website to inform you of upcoming virtual events and opportunities, and I invite you to join us in any new virtual world. I'm excited you are here today. To get the most of your time with us, please participate in the live chat to network with peers and to ask our presenters questions. I would like to remind everyone to respond to the poll questions so we can understand a bit more about you by accessing the poll by clicking on the poll icon along the bottom of your screen. We will share the first poll's results shortly. And now I have the pleasure of introducing your host for this series, SEI President Glenn Bell. Glenn recently retired from Simpson, Gumpert & Hager, where he spent his entire 45-year career rising from an entry-level engineer to CEO and board chair. As a structural engineer, Glenn was responsible for the structural design of iconic building structures and engaged in investigations of structural failures. During his 22 years as CEO, SGH grew substantially in size and geographic presence and was frequently named one of the best structural engineers to work for. In addition to serving as our current SEI president, Glenn is a director of the SEI Confidential Reporting on Structural Safety for US, a board member of the Charles Pankow Foundation, and a visiting scholar at the Department of Architecture and Civil Engineering at the University of Bath in the United Kingdom. And now please welcome Glenn.
Thank you, Laura, and hello, everyone. It's great to have you all here today. Structural and civil engineering offers wonderful opportunities to have rewarding careers where one can learn and grow and make a difference in the world. We're presented constantly with new challenges and opportunities, and this means that now more than ever, everyone, regardless of your experience level, needs to manage your own career path. So to help you in career management, it's my privilege to host this series of 4 SEI monthly live chats, each with guests who are recognized leaders in structural engineering. They offer a diverse spectrum of career stages and experiences. In each of the 1-hour sessions, our guests will briefly share their own career story, including successes and challenges, and then I'll invite you to join the discussion. This first session will cover the landscape of possible career paths, including roles in consulting, industry, education, construction, and government. And then sessions 2 through 4 will span 3 stages of career progression from the classroom to the boardroom. I'm so pleased to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Judith Mitrani-Reiser, who is our distinguished guest for this first session. Judy is the Associate Chief of the Materials and Structural Systems Division at NIST. She provides leadership in the development and coordination of statutory processes for making buildings safer and oversees the National Construction Safety Team, the National Earthquake Hazards Reduction Program, and the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program. Judy earned her BS from the University of Florida, MS from the University of California at Berkeley, and PhD from Caltech. She's currently a member and director of EERI, on the executive committee of Cross US, and is a member of ASCE. Welcome, Judy, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Glenn. And thank you also, SEI, for inviting me as your first guest in this new Career Path series. I'm really thrilled to speak with you about my personal career and offer some tips that I abide by and also that I share with those that I mentor. I hope that you will find these valuable, and please ask me later to reflect on topics that are of interest to you and are not captured in my talk. Let me start by giving you some background on my career. I spent the majority of my career as an academic and switched over to civil service as a government employee about 4 years ago. My training and all of my degrees are in civil and structural engineering, earthquake engineering, and applied mechanics. One theme that has been consistent in my work life is my earnest interest in finding and nurturing my professional family. As an undergraduate at the University of Florida, that professional family was largely the American Society of Civil Engineers. Actually, if you go up a few slides, yep, this one, this is a photo of me as a sophomore attending an ASCE regional meeting. It was during my undergraduate years that I realized I wanted to pursue a PhD in civil engineering. I worked for many years as an undergraduate research assistant in a geotechnical engineering lab. However, this experience is not what sparked my interest in higher education. Instead, it was working as an engineering intern at Failure Analysis, now known as Exponent, that defined my future career path. I spent 2 summers interning at Exponent's Miami office, which is where I'm from, with many forensic engineers who had PhDs. Every project that I worked on required me to develop a hypothesis for the failure mechanism, design an experiment or an analytical plan to test that hypothesis, and then summarize my conclusions. I loved it. I enjoyed the breadth of the projects and the skills that they required, but more importantly, I observed the joy that my supervisors drew from their everyday work, and I knew then that I too needed to pursue a PhD to work in a similar type of environment. I've always liked a challenge, and as an undergraduate, I thought the greatest challenge facing structural engineers was the dynamic loading of buildings and structural health monitoring. This naturally led me to the West Coast, where I spent almost 7 years, first as a master's student at UC Berkeley, and then as a PhD student at Caltech. I was a complete lab rat at Berkeley. I cherished every moment I spent in the structures lab. Was there in the mornings, was there in the evenings. I loved it. I was focused on showing that cheap, ubiquitous sensor networks were the future of structural engineering and necessary for predicting degradation and damage before catastrophic failures. I would have enjoyed doing this for many years, but as often happens, my life threw me a curveball. My husband's PhD advisor decided to move his lab to Caltech, and I decided to complete my studies there too. Negotiating my family and work life is something I've now had to do many times, and optimizing that balance has always led to major and positive changes in my life. In academia, I held about every position one can have, so feel free to ask me about any of those in our discussion part of this session. I've been a graduate research assistant, a postdoctoral fellow, a research faculty, tenure track faculty, and then later an adjunct professor. During this time, I was also able to squeeze in starting a family of my own, and now have 2 young daughters who bring me more joy than I could ever express in words. I spent a significant portion of my academic career balancing writing grants and papers and changing diapers. It was not always pretty, but finding a way to make both work has brought me much satisfaction and gratitude. I never hid my personal life from my students. My girls oftentimes came with me to campus, were with me in the evenings to attend student activities, for example. It allowed me to be flexible and be present for my students, but also taught my daughters at a very young age to sit quietly in the back of an auditorium while their mom did her thing. Having a partner who equally supports my career and my aspirations, as well as their own, has also allowed me to gracefully weave these 2 halves of my life. I spent the majority of my academic career trying to better understand the loss of function of buildings and the subsequent impacts that those have on critical community functions. My work has been experimental in a traditional structures lab. It's been computational as a seismic risk modeler. And then in the last decade, it's been extremely focused on fieldwork as a disaster scientist working across multiple disciplines. As a modeler, I became increasingly frustrated with the lack of consistently collected or at all collected data that was focused on building damage, loss of functions, any dependency on critical lifelines and supply chains. And then it became a core of my research group to better understand how critical buildings and specifically hospitals fare in disasters in terms of physical impact, resource challenges, and willingness of staff reporting to work. So I decided I needed to collect my own data. What I loved most about being a professor was engaging with students, and that's students at all levels, from K through 12 all the way to the graduate level. I loved learning from my students, being challenged by their questions, and being part of their unique professional journey. I was extremely dedicated to mentoring my own students, but also in creating a better environment for students on my campus. I started a postdoc association, a school chapter for the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, and also a local chapter of EERI, Earthquake Engineering Research Institute, all while a professor at Johns Hopkins University. We did not have a critical mass of Latinx engineering students on my campus, so we often joined forces with NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers, and with SWE, the Society of Women Engineers, for programming and all types of activities on campus. I strongly feel that you must leave a strong imprint of yourself anywhere you work. So strengthening the support network for underrepresented students and postdocs on my campus was my way of doing this. I changed career tracks and I moved to NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, almost 4 years ago. I spent my first 3 years as a director of disaster and failure studies program, and then I managed all activities that fell under the National Construction Safety Team Act, or the NCST. Now, the NCST is the NTSB of buildings, and just as the National Transportation Safety Board is charged with making transportation in the U.S. safer by conducting independent accident investigations and also advocating for safety improvements, the NCST authorizes NIST to establish teams to assess building performance and also to assess emergency response and evacuation procedures in the wake of any building failure that has resulted in a substantial loss of life or that posed a significant potential for a substantial loss of life. I'm now the Associate Chief of the Materials and Structural Systems Division at NIST, and I oversee all of the disaster statutory programs that are housed there. And these include the NCST, which I just described. It also includes NEHRP, the National Earthquake Hazard Reduction Program, and NWRP, the National Windstorm Impact Reduction Program. I feel extremely fortunate to be working at NIST because while I've added disaster policy to my work portfolio, I'm still able to advance research on public health impacts of disasters, on functional losses experienced by buildings peri and post events, and long-term impacts of disasters on communities. I'm still able to mentor students and postdoctoral fellows and also early career researchers. A typical week for me in the office, now my home, like many of you, involves drafting reports that are mandated by Congress, leading a mortality study in our Hurricane Maria program, and working with academic and NIST colleagues on a longitudinal flood study in North Carolina, and also providing technical assistance on draft legislation. I've had a rewarding research career as a structural engineer in both academia and in government. It's also had many ups and downs, providing me valuable lessons that I broadly share. Here are some tips that I'd like to share with all of you. First, identify your passion, focus your work, and run with it. Find balance between being a good colleague and protecting your time. This is something that took me some time to figure out for myself. Pick your battles, but absolutely identify a few that are worth fighting for and promote change, important change at your institution. Know your worth and don't let anyone ever dictate that for you. Be an inclusive leader in your company, your university, or your agency. Wear whatever makes you feel confident. Build a strong network of peers. This is important at every level of your career. Find mentors who share similar work-life values and don't just depend on mentors that are formally assigned to you. And you yourself should mentor, support, and inspire young professionals. You absolutely have to pay it forward. I'm really happy to answer any questions you may have later, including opportunities in a government research agency. And now I'll pass it back to Glenn. Thank you.
Judy, thank you so much for that. I mean, such an amazing and inspiring career. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions for you. And I think we have some results in now from the poll. So let's have a quick look at those before I tell my own story.
Just making sure everyone can see it here. It looks like we've got about 32% consulting. And then the next highest is about 23% from industry, then academia, a little bit of government, big chunk of students. Yes, lots of students, young professionals, but we do got a couple people in the 25 years or more experience as well. And let's see, reasons for attending today. The highest one here is curious about the topic for long-term planning, and then just beginning the career and trying to determine which sector they want to pursue. Those are the two highest.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Brittany. Nice cross-section of industries and work types. So thank you for that. And I'm sure after listening to more from Judy, we'll have more enrolling in the government sector than the 5% we saw there. So you have your work cut out for you, Judy. No, just kidding. Glad to see that there's a nice representation from students and young professionals. We hope that means that we have a lot to offer you here. Please bear in mind that subsequent sessions are going to focus on various career stages, but all of you, even the youngest, are welcome. And we've structured this in a way that we hope that you'll take benefit of all of the sessions as you plot your own career path. Let me give you a little background on my own career path, which has been quite different from Judy's, not unusual for my generation. I worked for one consulting company called Simpson, Gumpertz & Hager for my entire career. 45 amazing years from the time I left school until I retired last year. Now, spending one's entire career at one organization is not that common a path today. Things are changing very fast now. And unless you're extremely lucky, like I was, to fall into a firm that offered a long career path, or maybe perhaps too complacent, this is likely not the path that most of you will take. I did get to work on some great projects at SGH. Eventually, I became the company's CEO, which was a position I held for 22 years. And I was so fortunate that there was never a day where I felt my job wasn't secure or I wasn't challenged to learn and grow. That's not to say that the path was completely smooth, though, or without its periods when I had to make some really major decisions. Sometimes my career changed direction, or I even considered moving to another firm or striking out on my own. And these periods of important decision are shown with the yellow dots on this slide here. So while you are unlikely to experience, that tenure of 45 years with one firm as I did, I was confronted with major decision points that are likely similar to ones that you'll face. So in this session and those following, I hope to be able to share some of those decision points with you. Two important parallel tracks in my career are shown in the lower part of the slide. I was privileged to mentor hundreds of exceptionally talented engineers of all disciplines and experience levels, some inside SGH, many on the outside. Mentoring others has been and is still the most rewarding part of my career. I love it. And I will echo Judy's admonition to get involved in an early age in mentoring. I've also enjoyed teaching at university, often as a guest lecturer, but I also served as an adjunct at my alma mater, Tufts University. And as was mentioned earlier, I serve now as a visiting scholar at the University of Bath in UK. And then there are the amazing professional activities. The founders of my company, Simpson, Gumpertz & Hager, were MIT professors. And they believed that everybody should be a mentor, a teacher, and be involved in professional activities. In all three of those areas, they set great examples and they expected the same from all of us. So I've been engaged in many professional activities my entire career. And today, since my retirement from SGH, I work full-time on those things, mostly in ASCE and SEI. So with that, I would like to offer you my top 8 tips for managing your career path and taking action. The first thing I stress with people I mentor is that there are so many wonderful things that you can do with a career in structural and civil engineering. I really believe we work in the best professions on the planet. I think sometimes we too often project a narrow and outdated stereotypical images of what civil engineering is about. If you think of society's future challenges in areas like climate change and resilience and security and sustainability, on top of the continued revolution in technology, these things are redefining our profession and opening up so many new possibilities for one to make a difference in the world. Judy's career path, as you just heard, is absolutely inspiring. I mean, she's making a difference in the world for so many people. So my first piece of advice is to dream big. Think about what work would really inspire you. Take off the blinders and explore the possibilities and design your career and go for it. You have to take control of your own career, though. Forge your own path. Nobody's going to do it for you. The corollary to this first point is about self-awareness. You should periodically explore the question of what kind of work inspires you and why, because this will change over your career. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Does your job allow you to exploit your strengths and manage your weaknesses? Self-awareness is harder than you might think. It came very late for me in my career. It takes a lot of discipline, examining your past behaviors, and asking yourself some really hard questions, and answering yourself honestly. And this is where mentors come in. Find a great mentor who you can trust and who knows you well. A great mentor will show you
Looks like we're having a little technical difficulty here with Glenn. Let's give him a couple seconds. Usually he'll bounce back here.
hear me? I'll talk. Am I?
Ah, there you go. You're back.
Sorry,
Judy, do you want to talk about
I'm
mentorship
not
a little
seeing
bit
it.
while
Are
we wait for Glenn?
you on taking stock now?
Glenn, we're still in Know Yourself Well. Hopefully we can hear you. If not, I think I know what points you wanted to make here.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. Can you advance the slide? One more? Great. All right. My third point is that it's important to sit down about every year or two to really deeply assess your situation because things change. Are you still learning and growing? Do you have good working relationships with the people at your job? Do you come to work every day and give it 90 to 110%? Does your current role provide the opportunities you seek? Now, I'm not suggesting for a minute that you should consider changing jobs every year or two. Sometimes it's you who needs to change. Or often, if things aren't on a great path, you can work with your employer to make incremental changes to your job that will keep you on a good path. But sometimes, hopefully not too frequently, you're going to find yourself dissatisfied with what you do, and better opportunities will present yourself. The frequency with which you take stock is important, however. You don't want to ruminate constantly about this, but my experience is that a good deep dive on this subject every year or two is about right. Too frequently, I see people make career decisions that are short-sighted. They take the job that pays the most in the short term over the one that may pay less but be better for them in the long run. Or maybe they're disappointed because they didn't get the raise or promotion they wanted, or had a one-time unpleasant conflict with a boss, and they quit their job impulsively. I've seen that too. When you're taking stock, take the long view. Really think hard about what path will be best for you in reaching your long-term goals. Next slide, please. When I first joined SGH after graduate school, there was a recession on, and there was no work in building structural design, which was the kind of work I wanted to pursue. I was assigned as a field engineer for 6 months to a project to replace the roofing on a large building. It wasn't what I wanted to do, and I thought about quitting. But I gave it a chance, and it only lasted 6 months as my boss had promised. I applied myself to learn all I could about the subject, however, and I learned a lot. Not only a lot about building envelope technology, but about practical field experience, working with teams and motivating people. The job foreman was very experienced with only a high school education, but a lot of street smarts. And I was the wet-nosed kid with graduate degrees and no experience. But we got along great. We helped each other and we learned from each other. That 6-month experience that I didn't think I wanted turned out to be one of the best of my career because, number one, it was the only experience I had where I had an opportunity to have an extended presence on a construction site. And two, I learned something about a different part of SGH's business, and I'm sure that my broad knowledge of the company's business is the most important reason that I was later chosen to be SGH's CEO. So here, attitude is 90% of the battle. You can find relevant and satisfying experiences in the most unexpected places. And that diversity of experience is a career asset and even a life asset. Our work paradigms are changing. Classical hierarchical organization structures are being challenged. Collaboration is increasingly valued over individual stardom. And organizations are committing to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Just in the last several months, our view of teleworking has completely changed. As Sarah Sladek so eloquently described in her excellent keynote presentation, Generations at Work, at the Virtual Structures Congress in April, the boomer generation will be moving on, and millennials and other younger generations are rising to influence. I think it's going to be an exciting but somewhat bumpy transition. Some organizations are going to be more enlightened about this than others. So you want to work for a company that has an enlightened culture. Some career advancement paths in structural and civil engineering require significantly different skills and work from one position to the next. And just because you're good at your current level and happy there doesn't mean the same is going to hold true for the next level in your organization. Most engineers start out in technical roles, and in some cases, moving up means leaving the technical work behind and taking on full-time roles in management or marketing. These can be great roles, but this is a transition you should consider carefully if you love technical work. I was very fortunate to have a long run as CEO of SGH. It was really something I never envisioned I might do, and I was largely unprepared for it, but it was an amazing experience. In hindsight, however, I think I could have been just as happy in a more technically oriented path, and many of my colleagues of my generation at SGH did and had very satisfying careers. So the point here is that sometimes the greenest grass isn't at the next rung up the ladder. You want to know what that next job really entails and know yourself to understand if there's a match there. And finally, as engineers, we're taught to collect all the data, apply rational analyses, and make decisions that are correct with a very high degree of certainty. Career path choices don't work that way. You're never going to have all the data you want, and there are no rubrics to give you the right answer. And if you sit and overanalyze, you're going to get stuck in a rut and miss opportunities. You have to remember that if you make a career path mistake, you can recover. Other options are going to arise. No decision needs to be forever. I like the famous quote from Teddy Roosevelt, "In any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing, but the worst thing you can do is nothing." So with that, I think we're ready to move on to Q&A. Brittany?
Yeah, we've got quite a few questions going here through the chat, but I just want to get started with one, which I think might be a good starting point for us, and that is, how did you, both of you actually, how did you guys get into structural engineering?
Judy, you want to start with that?
Sure. So when I I first started as an undergrad. I knew I wanted to be an engineer because I loved science. I loved math coming into it. And I did one of these freshman lab courses that teaches you a little bit about every type of engineering. And for me, it was walking into the structures lab, and I fell in love. I knew it was exactly what I wanted to do, and it wasn't just about crushing that bridge.
For me, it was a lot of luck, but I discovered really what my primary passion was. I was selecting courses in my sophomore year as an undergraduate. I actually entered with the intent of being a chemical engineer. And after a couple of years of that, decided I hated chemical engineering. I was a little bit lost. And on a lark, I found an exploratory course that happened to fit into my schedule. That was the relationship between architecture and structural engineering. And I took that course, and a lot of it involved practitioners, structural engineers and architects coming in and talking about their work. And I just fell in love with the profession. And that changed, concentrations and never looked back. In retrospect, it occurred to me that I always enjoyed building things. I once, with my buddy across the street, constructed a 5-story treehouse in his backyard. So I love building things. So I guess everything came together for that. But there was a lot of luck and happenstance. And I think that's the way that things work a lot in career progression.
Absolutely.
Judy, I see a question. A lot of people are curious about your PhD. How long does it take to get a PhD? Well, first of all, I think you addressed this a little bit, but maybe you could elaborate on why you pursued a PhD a bit more, and tell people of how long it takes on average.
Yes. So I touched on it a bit. I said that, I had, as an undergrad, been doing a ton of research in the geotechnical lab, and I loved it. I had a really good time for a couple of years doing that. And every summer when I went home, I interned at Exponent, and I realized how much fun it was to go very deep into the projects that we had, to think creatively about what kind of experiments we might want to develop to test our hypothesis. And when I went back to school every year in the fall, I compare my experience to so many of my other friends' experiences, and it was so different working in this forensic engineering firm. And really, I pursued a PhD because I thought that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a forensic engineer, and I thought it required having a PhD. So that's initially how it started. And I never dreamed that it would take me on the career path that it has taken me.
That's great. Just a little personal reflection on pursuing PhDs from hiring at SGH. When I first started on there in the mid-70s, there was a general view that one would not pursue a PhD unless they wanted to go into academia to be a professor. And my view, and I think the company's view, has completely changed in that regard. And one of the things that we learned was that when you pursue the research part of a PhD, you're embarking on a path and building a skill that is a lifelong skill. And I think has become, over the decades that I've been in practice, more and more relevant. And what I mean by that is you pick a research topic and you have to go down a path to try to solve a problem. But everything is really ambiguous, and you're working in areas that haven't been worked on before. And you pick a path and you may go down a rat hole and find out it's a dead end and you have to go somewhere else or adjust course and so forth. And I think that is really what about the most creative aspects of structural and civil engineering is all about. And it's a lot more fun than pursuing, sort of rote procedures. So as time went on at SGH, just in consulting engineering practice, we hired more and more PhDs, and we were hiring a lot of them at the time that I retired. For that reason, there's a skill there. That doesn't mean that you need to have a PhD to do that sort of ambiguous work, that cutting edge work, but the experience certainly helps. We have a lot of questions about mentoring. Can you elaborate a little bit on your experience, first your experience with mentoring, Judy, and then having a mentor of your own?
Absolutely. So I love mentoring young engineers and scientists. It's for me the most exciting part of my work and absolutely the most gratifying part of my work. You know, I did it was part of my scope as a professor, right? That I'd mentor undergraduates and graduate students and postdocs as well. But I loved going above and beyond that. When I was a professor at Hopkins, I loved to do a lot of outreach activities in the city of Baltimore and mentor young kids in our city and get them excited about science, get them excited about engineering, because it's these sparks really early on that stick with you. And I was hoping that if I could just create or strengthen any one spark, then I've made a difference in their life. And so for me, it's really always been about being part of someone else's journey, of their professional and their journey as a human being. And I absolutely love it. I've had many mentors in my career, some that were assigned to me and some that I found accidentally. And I would say those that I found myself have been probably the most rewarding ones. And, you know, I used to think that you needed a mentor that had the career that you wanted. And I realized that that's not sufficient. What you really need to find is a mentor that has a career that inspires you, but that also has values about family and work-life balance, for example, that was important to me, that matched my own, right? So having a mentor that didn't want to spend a ton of time with their family was not going to ever work for me, right? So trying to find mentors that share your aspirations for life is also extremely important. And yeah, so for me, I would say that I had to navigate that. And it took some time, but when I found the right mentor, it was very helpful. I go to them for everything.
Yeah, great. I share a lot of the same views. As I said earlier, I really have enjoyed mentoring my whole life, and it's still the most exciting thing that I do. To be able to pay forward, as you said earlier, Judy, your experience and lend that to others and help others. And, you know, throughout my career, the things in which that I've taken the most pride have varied. You know, as I was really a young engineer, a great set of calculations, you know, was a fantastic day and something to really aspire to. And then, of course, having a successful project and a happy client and so forth. And those things have changed for me over time. But for the last half of the 45 years at SGH, at least, the number one thing that I really took satisfaction from was helping engineers to grow, both inside SGH and a lot, because they made so much difference in my career. And I echo your statement about values, and also the fact that you don't necessarily want a mentor who has had the same path that you have. And I'll give you an example of that. And this is pretty far down along in my career, but when I was ascending to the CEO role at SGH, my mentor was the company's original CEO, Howard Simpson. And he mentored me for 2 years going into that role and for 2 years after it came out. And he was fantastic, really gracious with his time and extremely helpful. And I would have failed without his assistance. But there became a point in time as the company was growing when his basis of experience, which was founding the firm up to about 100 people, and my experiences was taking it from 100 people to eventually up to 600 people, were different levels of experience. And in time, I found, as wonderful as his help was, that I needed help from people who had that broader, bigger experience. Interestingly, I found it amongst a group of CEOs that weren't even in engineering. They were CEOs of other businesses. bankers, med tech people, you name it. And they were fantastic mentors as well. So I've probably had over my career a half a dozen, many mentors, but a half a dozen of them that were really critical, I would say, and important to me. And they changed over time because you grow and you need different kinds of advice and guidance over time as well. So while you were talking about that experience with mentoring, we did have a question coming in for you, Judy, about balancing a busy career in academia with raising a family. Did you ever feel that you had to choose between either starting a family or pursuing a continuing education? What's your advice?
I absolutely did feel like I had to choose, and very early on in my career, I felt that I couldn't start a family until after tenure, which is actually quite late in one's life to be starting a family. And I would say things changed for me. I went out for brunch with the chair of a department, of a civil engineering department, who's a woman, and she just wanted to chat. And we ended up having this wonderful breakfast. And I think, she wanted to share her experiences. And she told me 3 stories of her story and 2 of her colleagues from MIT. And at the end of the story, what you realize that you have 3 women got their PhDs in the 70s, which was not many women getting PhDs in civil engineering in the 70s. Each took a very different path. And she told me in great detail the path that each one took. And each had a very successful career. Mm-hmm. So in a way, what she told me at the end, she's like, it doesn't matter. It's never a great time to stop trying to overplan this and overthink this, just do it. And the point is that you can find a success in many career paths with the PhD. And you can take that burden off of yourself. And so I would say that kind of released me and my family to change our thinking. And I was really happy to have 2 kids before tenure.
Yeah, great. Really inspiring story for many. Thank you for sharing that, Judy. Here's a question from someone who is looking at the rough timeline of a position of advancement for a structural graduate entering into a structural consulting firm as an entry-level position to an intermediate level structural or senior structural engineer. Any idea on this would be welcome. I'll take a shot at that since he's talking about consulting engineers. Yeah. A lot of that really depends on your experience and your path and what your goals are and the kind of firm that you are in. But in general, I think when you graduate and are beginning to go into consulting, one of your first priorities needs to be thinking about getting a PE and what experience you need to get the PE and how you prepare yourself for that. Obviously, you want to focus on your work and learn all you can about your work, but you're not going to be put in any position of responsibility likely without a PE license. That's the way it is at many firms in consulting, not necessarily in industry and other places as well. So think about that. In my own career, I really found that around 5 years of experience, I was really starting to feel like I knew what I was doing and not bumbling around in the dark, which is what much of the first 5 years felt like. I had my PE. I got it as soon as I was able to get it. I had really good mentors as well. So probably something around 5 years is when you really start to feel you're really providing value and ready to take on more and more independence. I also know from, as a manager of an engineering firm, that it's really about 3 or 5 years out when, as a supervisor, you can give somebody more responsibility and think that they're ready to take that on and know what they know and what they don't know. That's a really important thing. So there you go. What else do we have here?
There was a question about how I felt my PhD prepared me for my current role at NIST.
Yes.
And I'd like to take that one because I think it can help the audience understand a bit more about government research labs. So I think there were two parts of the question, or questions back to back. Most of the people that I work with at NIST do have PhDs. I know that that was one of the questions, and that is true of a lot of government laboratories. And what I think is really valuable about a PhD is that it trains you for so many skills that you're not realizing while you're getting it. You know, Glenn touched on this a bit when he was talking about thinking creatively, deeply, and critically. I think this is something that is absolutely central to a PhD. Not knowing the answer, not knowing the path that will take you to the answer, and being okay with that amount of uncertainty, right, in your current role in your career. But it also gives you an enormous amount of skills about thinking on your feet, which is really important. So all of those horrible, you know, oral exams and defenses and candidacy exams, they're all to help force you to think critically, because you will be put in many situations where you will have to answer a lot of tough questions. And if that's not a skill that you've developed over your graduate studies or even your postdoc training, then it'll be really rough for you, I would say, as a faculty member, or even, you know, in the positions that I've had at NIST, you know, I have to answer to advisory committees and I have to answer to Congress, and I have to be able to think critically and quickly about what those answers should be. In addition to that, I think oral and written communication skills is crucial. You know, when I was a high school student, I didn't love writing. I didn't, it wasn't something that came easily to me. And when I went into engineering, I thought, great, I've escaped that, right? I can just crunch numbers all the time and I'll have a very happy life. And it turns out everything I do requires writing, and not just writing, but excellent writing, convincing writing. And so being able to have advisors throughout my career and during my PhD and postdoc that were excellent writers themselves and trained me on how to do that, I extremely appreciate all of that guidance.
Yeah, fantastic. So we have a kind of related question here, and I think this is directed to both of us, Judy, but when do structural positions, and it mentions consultant companies, but I think it's relevant to your experience as well, start to become less technical and more managerial? When do you start using the soft skills much more by leading meetings and delegating and so forth? You want to take a stab at that and I'll follow up?
Sure. So I would say that I've always been technical, and having a technical part of my everyday work is something that is really important to me, that feeds my soul, I should say. And I'm now in a position that is solely managerial, and I could treat it as such. But it's something that I still love, that technical piece. And so I continue to have projects that are, I would say, on the side. They're humongous projects, right? But I still do that because it keeps me, I feel that it keeps me relevant. It keeps me connected to the science. It keeps me learning, which I think is something that all of us should do all the time, learn new skills all the time. And so I always hold on to a bit of these, you know, technical pet projects, even in a position that's completely management.
Yeah, great answer. In my own experience, it was pretty early on when I recognized the soft skills were important, even though I was in roles that were largely technical. As you mentioned, Judy, writing, other forms of communication, time management, collaboration, teamwork. These are important skills right out of the box, because if you can't deliver the technical expertise in a way that's useful and communicate it and convey it, that technical expertise really goes for naught. But But you will find, and depending on what your path is, that as you take on more managerial roles, for me, project management started about 5 years out. But I was still doing technical work. Almost all of the principals at SGH are primarily doing technical work, and they're managing projects and clients and programs. So that's a very, very common path. The real pinch point for me was when I became CEO. And that was, let's see, 20 years after, at 20 years experience, I became CEO at the ripe old age of 43. And I felt that I could do that job sort of half-time, and that I could still do all of the engineering work that I'd love to do. And boy, was that a mistake. It actually worked for a little while, but as the company grew and grew and grew, the CEO demand grew with it, and it squeezed down my ability to do more and more technical work. So that by my retirement, I was probably 95% managerial, but like you, Judy, I still wouldn't give up the technical work. And so I wasn't managing projects, I wasn't managing clients, but I had certain specialty expertise within the company that people would come for, or I would do project quality reviews and those things to sort of keep my finger in it, because I didn't want to give that piece up. Because I loved it, but also I felt it was important for me to know what the work in the engineering trenches looked like in order to run the company properly. So exactly. I don't know that you ever need to give it up, especially if you love it. Right. Good. Here's someone who agrees with us that creativity is an essential role in structural engineering, Judy. I'm glad to hear that. And I will say that I believe, and others, that this is critical for our profession going forward. Because if you look at the impact of technology on the work that we do, and if you look at all of the societal problems that we need to tackle, I was taught in school in a very traditional way. Your role was to crank out calculations. And I had very little exposure to the softer side and humanities and things like that. That can't work anymore. I got away with it because it was so long ago, but machines are doing more and more of the number crunching, and they're going to continue to do so, or they're going to continue to be more relevant, while the problems are getting more and more challenging, and the competition globally is getting higher. So the challenge for us as a profession is to ask and answer the question of what are those things that we've done in the past that we should leave for the machines to do? That's the number crunching. And what can we, with our uniquely human skills, do to provide high value and make a difference in the world? Creativity is at the top of that list, I think.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
And Glenn, I had a thought as you were speaking just now. A lot of questions about, when we transition to these managerial roles in our careers. A lot of times, the skills that we are required to have as managers, as supervisors, as we grow in our career, they're not taught in any engineering curriculum, right? And so I wanted to make sure that I remind those that are with us today that we have some references and resources available to you online that will help educate you on how to be a good mentor, how to run a lab, how to run a research group, all these kinds of things that we're talking about today. But in addition to that, when I joined NIST, one of the first things that they did was send me to a leadership camp, right? They sent me away for a couple of weeks. And, at first I was extremely skeptical of this, camp. And in the end, I really grew to appreciate it. And more than that, I found my peers, right? I found my peers across my agency, and that I depend on and lean on even today. So it was a great resource, and just a reminder that all of these skills that we've acquired are not things that we're taught in those first 4 years of our, education, but that you have to continue learning over time, and don't be shy to do that.
Absolutely. Great point. Thank you, Judy. We have time for a couple of more questions, and I think this is one best for you to take, Judy. It says, I'm in the process of getting my Master's of Science in Civil Engineering in Structural Engineering, and I have an interest in working in the public sector. I have concerns there may be limited options for the SEs in this area. Can you provide some insight or advice?
Oh, I think that I think that structural engineers in the public sector is, I think there's a role for structural engineers in every sector. I strongly believe that. And, I have worked with social scientists, I have worked with architects, I have worked with epidemiologists, I have worked with state agencies, government agencies, ministries from other countries. I have seen such a huge range of work environments, and I have always found that it was my education as a structural engineer that sometimes gave me that edge in those settings. And so what I want to reiterate, and I think Glenn, you said it earlier on in your talk earlier, that there's an opportunity for structural engineers to find their home in many sectors. And to some extent, you have to define that. You have to define why your unique voice as a structural engineer belongs in that sector. Don't be afraid of it, and don't shy away from it. Don't let them define it for you, but you define it. You define why that matters. And in my case, it was that I really deeply cared about the safety of hospitals. And so that brought me to so many sectors that were unfamiliar to me at the time. But as an engineer, I felt like I had a lot to say about the safety of these critical buildings. But then once I was in that space, that message grew to more than just the structure or the lifelines, but it grew to the services that these buildings provide, and how central a role they play in communities overall.
Yeah, fantastic, really good. Judy, I'm going to take one more question and suggest that we each answer it very quickly. I'll go first because I've read the question, I've had a little more time to think about it. But the question is, what are the 3 most important skills for an entry-level structural engineer to have? So my answer to that would be communication, managing time so you can meet expectations, and knowing how to get correct results from a computer analysis.
All right, I'll give you my 3. I think strong analytical and computational skills, and that's don't rely just on those computational skills. You have to be very strong analytically. I agree with communication. Extremely good communication, both written and oral, I think is critical. Learning to, how you present yourself in every kind of setting, and even now where we're mostly virtual, is extremely important. And being a good team player, knowing how to learn in a large, work in a large interdisciplinary team, being respectful of others and advancing the work together is extremely critical.
Great. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Judy. That was a great discussion. We had a lot of questions, and we've got so many still in the chat. We'll have to make sure we send those along to you and see if we can get some more of those questions answered. I hope everyone enjoyed today's first session for the Career Path series. You should see the exit poll on your screen now. And just as a reminder, all ASC SCI members will be able to access this recording along with the resources that both Glenn and Judy mentioned. The link is on the screen. I typed it incorrectly in the chat, so just make sure you grab the one from the screen. And we hope to see everyone on August 18th for the second session, starting out entry-level to project engineer with guests Sherilyn Henry and Fernando Martinez. Glenn, Judy, do you have any last words?
Judy?
I would say bring creativity and bring passion to all that you do. You'll be great.
Fantastic. Really good advice. I just want to thank you all so much for sharing your experience and wisdom. There's so many great questions we didn't have a chance to get to today, but I'll promise you we're going to carry those forward to subsequent ones, fitting them in the session that they best fit in among the 3 to follow. So please join us, regardless of where you are in your path in your career right now. I think you'll find relevance in everything that we're going to be talking about for the next few months. So please come back and chat with us again. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And this concludes today's session. Bye, everyone.